This video is a demonstration of surface reflections in my real-time path tracer. So let me move the light around and we can watch what happens to the reflections and how they change as I do. Having surface reflections is called specularity or specular lighting. And one way to think about it, an oversimplified way, is that it allows objects to appear to be shiny. And sure enough, if we look at the objects that I've placed in this world, there are some that are very shiny. But the important thing to notice is that it's not only the shiny objects that are reflecting light, but in fact, every object in this scene is reflecting light. If we look, for example, at this bottom row of spheres, they're made of metal, and their surface is on the rougher side, but we can still see that they are reflecting their environment. The reflections are blurry compared to the row above where the metal is more smooth and we see sharp reflections. But these blurry reflections are often more visually interesting and exciting than the sharp ones. I can move the light bulb over against the left side, against the wall there, and we can see some yellow as it's reflecting against the wall. I can move the light bulb down close to the floor, and even though the floor didn't initially appear to be shiny, with the light close and at a specific viewing angle, we can see that yes, it is also reflecting these blurry reflections of the scene, just like in real life. So I should clarify that implementing specularity by itself isn't particularly impressive. Every game has specularity. I've implemented it myself many times in different contexts. So what made this particular project challenging wasn't the specularity by itself, it was implementing the specularity and integrating it with path tracing, and more specifically with real-time path tracing. Path tracing is the rendering method I'm using, and it involves ray tracing, and tracing many rays, and in fact more rays conceptually than are possible to be traced computationally. And one consequence of this is that you end up with noise in the image. You've probably noticed it already depending on YouTube's video compression, but if I position the light bulb right here, it's pretty easy to see. If we look at the left and right walls, the shadows on those walls, you can see that they're kind of speckly and sparkly. That is what I'm calling noise. It's also pretty easy to see on the bottom row of rough metallic spheres. If you look at those reflections that we talked about earlier, you can see that they are kind of shimmering and sparkling. That is noise, and it's just part of path tracing. There are ways of mitigating that called denoisers, but I am not using any denoising in the project right now. And so the challenge when I added these surface reflections was to try and minimize the noise that it added, or at least keep it to an acceptable level. Now, some people hate noise, so if you're in that category, you probably don't think that this is acceptable. I don't mind it so much, and definitely for my personal goals with this project, I was really happy with how this turned out. I think adding surface reflections really enhances the realism of materials. I have kind of a personal way of evaluating whether a material is effective, and that is to imagine reaching out my hand and touching something in the scene. And then the question to myself is, can I imagine what it would feel like to do that? If I can, I consider it a successful material. And if I can't, then I think even if it looks cool, maybe it's not doing its job because I don't know what it's supposed to be. So if we take that way of judging materials and we apply it to the scene that we're looking at, I think that many of the objects pass that test, and that makes me really happy. So all of the shapes I have are really simple. They're just boxes and spheres, and I don't have any textures, so we only have solid colors. But even with that simple scene setup, adding surface reflection to the path tracing that I already had, makes it so that for many of these objects, I really do know what it would feel like if I reached out my hand and touched them. So that was a pretty gratifying result of this hard work. So that is the result of adding surface reflections to the path tracer. We still have all of the nice indirect lighting that I talked about in a previous video, but added to that we now have more realistic materials where we can tell how rough or smooth they are. Thank you for watching.